The air inside the sold-out arena was electric, thick with anticipation. Every seat was filled, every eye locked onto the ring, where two men stood at opposite corners, one a modern social media juggernaut turned boxer, the other a living legend, a force of nature who had once sent shivers down the spines of the toughest fighters on the planet. The world had called it a spectacle, a clash of generations, a fight that shouldn't even be possible. But now, under the blinding lights, with millions watching across the globe, Jake Paul and Mike Tyson were seconds away from proving whether this was just entertainment or something far more dangerous. Jake Paul bounced on the balls of his feet, rolling his shoulders, his face a mask of confidence. He had made a career out of shocking the world, stepping into fights he had no business winning and walking away with his hand raised. He had built an empire on controversy, but tonight, none of that mattered. He wasn't facing an influencer, a retired fighter, or a carefully picked opponent. He was staring down the most feared heavyweight in history, a man who had knocked out giants before Jake had even been born. Across the ring, Mike Tyson stood still, his body relaxed in a way that only came from decades of experience. His eyes, however, told a different story. They burned with something primal, something that had made him the youngest heavyweight champion in history. People had called him old, past his prime, a relic of another era, but those people had never stood in front of him, never felt the weight of his presence, never heard the stories of the ones who had dared to trade punches with him and never recovered. The bell hadn't even rung, but Jake could already feel it. This was different from any fight he had been in before. There was no social media banter that could prepare him for this moment, no viral clip that could explain the tension pressing down on his chest. This was real. The referee stepped to the center, motioning for both fighters to approach. As they did, the contrast between them became even clearer. Jake, young, strong, full of bravado, standing inches taller, his frame built from years of modern training and conditioning. Tyson, shorter but thicker, his arms coiled with muscle that had delivered some of the most devastating knockouts in boxing history. The crowd roared as the referee gave final instructions, but neither man was listening. Jake locked eyes with Tyson, searching for doubt, for hesitation. He found none. Instead, he saw something chilling, something he hadn't fully prepared for. It wasn't anger or aggression. It was patience. A bead of sweat rolled down Jake's back as he stepped away, retreating to his corner. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, visualized every possible outcome. But now, as the final seconds ticked away before the opening bell, he couldn't shake one thought from his mind. Had he made the biggest mistake of his life? The bell rang, and for the first few seconds, neither man moved. The arena, once deafening, seemed to hold its breath. Jake Paul, light on his feet, circled the ring, his mind racing through every strategy drilled into him during training. Tyson, however, remained rooted, his eyes tracking Jake's movements like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Jake had fought big names before, but none like this. Every sparring session, every training camp had been built around youth, speed, and power. But what do you do against a man who had built his legacy on ending fights before his opponents even knew what hit them? The answer wasn't coming fast enough, and the moment of hesitation cost him. Tyson lunged forward, cutting the distance in half with terrifying explosiveness. Jake reacted on instinct, snapping out a jab to create space, but the legend barely flinched. He slipped the punch with ease, weaving under and launching a right hook that cut through the air like a missile. Jake barely got his guard up in time, the force of the punch sending a tremor through his entire body. The crowd erupted as Tyson pressed forward, his movements deceptively smooth for a man his age. This wasn't just nostalgia, this was real. Every step, every slip, every head movement carried the weight of experience that no amount of training could replicate. Jake fired back, throwing a quick combination aimed at Tyson's midsection, hoping to slow him down. The shots landed, but they had little effect. Tyson smirked, barely acknowledging the blows, and in that moment, Jake realized something chilling. Tyson was testing him. He wasn't throwing full power yet. He was waiting. From ringside, analysts debated whether Jake had the skill to weather the storm. Some argued that his youth and conditioning would eventually wear Tyson down. Others, the ones who had seen Tyson's early fights, weren't so sure. The power, the reflexes, those might have faded slightly, but the mindset, the killer instinct, was still there. Meanwhile, in Jake's corner, his team shouted instructions, urging him to stay on the outside, to use his footwork, to avoid getting caught in the pocket. He knew they were right, but there was something in him that refused to back down. He had built his career proving people wrong, and he wasn't about to start running now. A hard jab snapped Tyson's head back, but he barely seemed to notice. Instead, he stepped forward again, closing the gap with a level of pressure that Jake had never experienced before. The space inside the ring was disappearing fast, and with each second, Jake felt himself being backed toward the ropes. Then, just as he tried to pivot away, Tyson struck. A brutal left to the body, followed by a thunderous right uppercut that barely missed its mark. Even though the punch didn't land clean, the sheer force of it sent Jake stumbling back. The ropes caught him, but for the first time in his career, he felt something he wasn't used to feeling inside the ring. Fear. Tyson saw it. He smelled it. And that's when he knew this fight was only getting started. Jake's lungs burned as he tried to shake off the shock of that last exchange. Tyson wasn't just walking him down, he was dismantling him, breaking his rhythm, forcing him into a fight that he wasn't ready for. He needed to adapt, to slow the pace before it was too late. But Tyson had other plans. The legend's movements were deceptively calm, his eyes locked onto Jake like a predator waiting for the perfect opening. He feinted a jab, forcing Jake to react, then lunged in with a left hook that barely missed his chin. Jake ducked just in time, but he could feel the wind from the punch as it sailed past. Too close. Way too close. Sweat dripped down Jake's brow as he backed away, trying to regain control of the space between them. His corner was shouting, urging him to stay mobile, but it felt impossible. Tyson wasn't just chasing him, he was cutting off the ring, eliminating escape routes, forcing him into a position where there would be nowhere left to run. Then, out of nowhere, Jake took a risk. He planted his feet and threw a blistering right hand, putting every ounce of power he had into the punch. The crowd gasped as it connected flush with Tyson's jaw, the impact so loud it echoed through the arena. For a split second, everything stopped. Jake saw Tyson's head snap to the side, his body shifting ever so slightly. It was the cleanest shot he had landed all night. But Tyson didn't go down. Instead, he turned back to Jake with an eerie grin, licking his lips as if he had just tasted something familiar. That was the moment Jake realized what was happening. Tyson wasn't just fighting, he was enjoying this. The war, the chaos, the danger, this was where he thrived. And Jake had just woken up the monster. With terrifying speed, Tyson exploded forward, closing the distance in an instant. Jake barely had time to react before a crushing left hook slammed into his ribs, stealing the air from his lungs. Pain shot through his body, his knees nearly buckling. Before he could recover, Tyson followed up with a brutal right to the temple, sending him stumbling to the side. The crowd roared as Jake desperately tried to clinch, to hold on for just a second, but Tyson ripped himself free, delivering another vicious body shot that made Jake wince in agony. The referee hovered nearby, watching closely, but Jake refused to go down. His mind was spinning, his vision blurring at the edges, but his pride wouldn't let him collapse. He had built his career on proving people wrong, on taking the impossible and making it reality. He wouldn't let this be the moment that shattered everything. Then, just when it seemed like the fight was slipping away, something changed. Tyson took a step back. He wasn't retreating, but his expression had shifted. The grin was gone, replaced with something else, something almost thoughtful. He glanced at the clock, then back at Jake, tilting his head slightly as if assessing something only he could see. Jake, gasping for breath, saw the opening and took it. With everything he had left, he launched a wild overhand right, throwing caution to the wind. The punch connected, staggering Tyson just enough for Jake to follow up with a quick combination to the body. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then the bell rang. Jake stumbled back to his corner, his body screaming in pain. His team swarmed him, frantically working to keep him in the fight. Across the ring, Tyson sat on his stool, staring at Jake with that same unreadable expression. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just about winning anymore. Tyson had seen something he wasn't saying. And Jake had a sinking feeling that whatever it was about to change everything. Jake wiped the sweat from his face as he sat in the corner, breathing heavily, his ribs aching with every inhale. His team frantically worked around him, pressing ice packs against his body, shouting instructions, but his mind was elsewhere. Across the ring, Tyson was still staring at him, unblinking, unmoving, as if he had already figured out how this fight would end. Jake had never been in this position before, not just physically battered, but mentally rattled. He had landed his best shots, and Tyson had barely flinched. And yet, there was something about that look in Tyson's eyes. It wasn't mockery, nor was it amusement anymore. It was something far more unsettling: respect. The bell rang, signaling the next round, and Jake pushed himself off the stool, his legs heavy, his arms burning. Tyson didn't charge forward this time. He approached with measured steps, his movements calculated, his breathing steady. Jake knew this was it, the final stretch. If he had any hope of turning the tide, it had to happen now. He feinted a jab, hoping to bait Tyson into an opening, but the legend barely reacted. Instead, Tyson stepped in and threw a devastating right hook. Jake saw it too late. The punch landed clean on his jaw, snapping his head sideways, sending a shockwave through his body. His vision blurred, the world spinning violently as his legs buckled beneath him. He crashed onto the canvas, the sound of the impact drowned out by the deafening roar of the crowd. The referee immediately stepped in, beginning the count. Jake could hear it faintly, his mind struggling to regain control of his body. For 5. His fingers dug into the canvas as he tried to push himself up, but his arms wouldn't cooperate. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else, numb and disconnected. He looked up and saw Tyson standing in the neutral corner, watching him, his expression unreadable. 7-8. Jake forced himself to his knees, blinking rapidly to clear the fog in his mind. He wasn't done. He couldn't be done. The referee's voice felt distant, but he clung to it, using it as an anchor to pull himself back. 9. With one final push, he got to his feet. His legs wobbled, but he was up. The referee studied him closely, checking his eyes, asking if he could continue. Jake nodded, his jaw clenched, refusing to give in. The fight wasn't over yet. Tyson, however, didn't come charging forward like before. Instead, he took a step back, lowering his hands slightly. It wasn't arrogance, it was something else. A challenge. He had given Jake every reason to stay down, but the kid had stood up anyway. Now, Tyson wanted to see what he had left. Jake dug deep, ignoring the pain, ignoring the exhaustion, and lunged forward with a desperate combination. He swung wildly, pouring everything into his punches, but Tyson moved effortlessly, slipping past them with a grace that defied his years. Then, with the precision of a master, Tyson countered with a final, crushing uppercut. Jake's world went black before he even hit the canvas. The next thing he knew, he was staring at the bright lights above, his back pressed against the mat, his ears ringing. The fight was over. He had lost. But as he turned his head, blinking through the haze, he saw Tyson standing over him, not celebrating, not gloating, just watching. And then, in a moment that no one expected, Tyson reached down, offering his hand. Jake hesitated, then grasped it, letting Tyson pull him to his feet. The crowd erupted, not in cheers for a victor or boos for a loser, but in pure admiration for what they had just witnessed. This wasn't just a fight, it was a test. And though Jake had lost, he had earned something far more valuable. Tyson leaned in, his voice low so only Jake could hear. "You got heart, kid. That's rare." Then, just as quickly as it had begun, Tyson turned and walked away, leaving Jake standing in the center of the ring, battered but unbroken. He had come for a fight. What he got was a lesson, one that he would never forget.